Okay, everyone. I think we're waiting, and we might have a few more folks who will trickle in here as we get started. But thank you all for being here and for spending your time with us this afternoon. Before we do anything further or make any introductions, it is absolutely critical that we take a moment to stop and acknowledge the land that we're gathered upon. We have an image here of North America, Turtle Island, where we have all the various overlays of Indigenous territories from north to south. And of course, if we look around the world, there are many, many more. For myself and I think for one of the candidates that are here and for many of you, we are gathered on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Wauthuth Peoples. And we say that not only to perform the kind of perfunctory notion of talking about where we're from, but to acknowledge and recognize and highlight the acts of violence that are ongoing, the acts of dispossession, of the denial of Indigenous sovereignty taking place in places such as Nova Scotia right now, where the Mi'kmaq people are facing incredible challenges, the ongoing challenges in the Wet'suwet'en territory, northern British Columbia, and many, many others. We acknowledge this as a commitment, I think, on the part of both of our candidates we'll hear from today, but as well as I know so many of us working in the climate and environment world to pursue reconciliation and decolonization thoroughly, emphatically, passionately, as part of our work to not only save this planet, but to build a better world in the process. So I invite all of you to share your name, your pronouns, and the territories that you're joining us from in the chat here. I think we'll hear probably from both of the candidates as well, where they're coming from to us today. And again, to recognize that this critical imperative we face to decolonize and achieve reconciliation is a foundational issue in this election and is something that we will all be working on going forward. So thank you for joining us today. Thank you for being a part of these, addressing these key challenges. And with that, we're going to get started. If you can go to the next slide, please. Wonderful. So I have the unique pleasure and privilege of being your moderator today. My name is George Benson. I am the co-founder and managing director of a small Vancouver nonprofit called the Climate Migrants and Refugees Project. As I said, I'm joining you from the MST territory here in what's known as Vancouver. And I am, again, uniquely privileged to be representing a number of really incredible youth organizations that have put this event together. We have Green Jobs for All as part of the Student Energy Leaders Fellowship Program in partnership with Climate Justice UBC, SFU 350, Sustainabiliteens, and Our Time, as well as Climate Justice UBC, an amazing collection of organizations that are all working together to highlight the voices not only of climate change and the needs of climate change, but of two particularly insightful, interesting, dynamic candidates who are young climate champions as well. My role here is to oversee the proceedings. We're going to keep things pretty tight here because this debate, or this forum rather, actually has two parts. One of them is an opportunity for us to hear from the candidates on a selection of core issues that are important to them and things that we think issues that we think are really critical in the climate world and in the British Columbia election this year. And then we're going to have an opportunity for you as audience members to talk to these two really inspiring young people and hear about what brings them to politics, what is the work they want to achieve if they are successful in joining government, and what advice might they have for you folks if you're looking to pursue similar kinds of activities in your work. We are really privileged to, as I say, to have Tesicca Truong, who's running for the BC NDP in the Vancouver-Langara riding, and Harrison Johnston, who's running for the BC Greens in North Vancouver-Seymour. Two really, as I say, dynamic, exciting, interesting candidates who probably don't need any introduction to you, but I think that you will all have lots of interesting things, hopefully some new insights that'll be generated from this conversation. What I'm going to do now quickly is just give you a sense of where we're going to go in this conversation. In just a minute here, I'm going to ask the candidates to introduce themselves. We're going to have a timer that's going to show over the course of this event where we're going to ask the candidates to adhere to the times that they're allotted to. So pretty much everything we will ask them to do will be about 2 minutes, and you'll see a timer running through, counting down. We're going to start with the candidates introducing themselves, 2 minutes to do so. Then we're going to go into some specific questions about why they're interested in the election, what brings them to kind of climate politics in BC. We're going to talk about accountability and how we measure and track and adhere to the goals in climate action. We're going to talk about green jobs and the just transition. We're going to talk about resilience and adaptation. And as I say, we're going to turn it over to you folks in the audience to ask questions about anything that you think is of interest to these two candidates. So I have done a little bit of background work here and flipped a coin just to decide who's going to go first. And so the winner of that was Harrison, and I see him here. So Harrison, I'm going to ask you to start with 2 minutes here to introduce yourself and what brings you here to us today. So if we can start the timer, please.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. My name is Harrison Johnston. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm the BC Green Party candidate for North Vancouver Seymour. I'm calling in today from the unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Squamish and Tsleil-Wauthuth people, colonially known as North Vancouver. As a settler, now running within the colonial political system, it is very important to recognize my role in perpetuating colonialism. I check in with myself every day to ensure that I never lose track of the people who are on the front lines, whether it's the Mi'kmaq fishermen, land defenders right now in our province, the Wet'suwet'en, tiny house warriors up in Blue River, or the Squamish and Tsleil-Wauthuth right here fighting to protect our inlet. Just over 1 year ago today, I was a lead organizer of the climate strike, which brought more than 150,000 people to the streets from across Metro Vancouver. It was the biggest protest in Vancouver history, and it was organized entirely by young people, demanding that our government step up and start taking real climate action at the scale we need. Since then, the Horgan government has doubled down on giving billions of dollars of subsidies to the fracking industry, forcing pipelines through unceded Indigenous territory without consent, and criminalizing Indigenous land defenders. We have seen the real consequences of this as wildfire smoke has blanketed our communities this past month. The NDP and Liberals may be content with having a smoky season every summer, but I'm not. COVID-19 has given us an opportunity to dramatically shift the focus of our economy. We need to stop building fossil fuel infrastructure and instead invest in transitioning to a green and just economy. We need to stop logging our old growth forests, which serve as critical habitat and carbon sinks, and instead transition to a more sustainable logging industry. We need to enshrine UNDRIP into law and ensure that Indigenous people always have free, prior, and informed consent before any infrastructure is built on their unceded territory, and that land defenders and water protectors are never criminalized. It's time to elect a government that will truly prioritize the needs of people and the health of our planet over hoarding political power. Thank you.
Thank you, Harrison. Tesicca, you are up. When you're ready, we can start the timer. Thank you.
Okay. Hello, everyone. And first off, I just wanted to thank you all for hosting this event and thank Harrison as well for putting his name forward. And then, of course, I want to acknowledge that we are on and I'm running this campaign and have grown up as a settler on unceded Coast Salish territories, the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Wauthuth. And I actually spent Monday afternoon with the CEO, Devin Sharma, and as well as Chief Wayne Sparrow from Musqueam Nation. So I went and visited and spoke with them about what their priorities were, hoping to start to build that relationship if I am elected. And that's the commitment that I have, not just with Musqueam, but of course with Squamish and Tsleil-Wauthuth as well, growing up on shared lands, but particularly because Vancouver-Langara, the riding that I'm running in with the BC NDP, was actually the home of Susnam, which is a Musqueam village that was essentially eradicated and I think to this day still hasn't had the attention and also the recognition that it deserves. As Harrison mentioned, I think that the climate crisis is the issue of our generation, and I've been fighting this for nearly a decade now, since I was in high school, whether that be fighting the Enbridge pipeline, but also then as soon as I think we won that fight, pivoting and starting to do work against Kinder Morgan as well. And I was an environmental science student and also the environmental rep at SFU, which is at the base of the mountain where the Kinder Morgan pipeline would end as well. And I did quite a bit of advocacy work and intervened and testified on behalf of SFU students against this type of project and this type of work. And that is exactly why I'm running, because I think that, regardless of what party we decide to run with, we know that the climate crisis affects us all, and we need strong climate advocates in every single party. I think we can probably see from the absence of the BC Liberals at this, how high this ranks in terms of a priority. And so I'm really excited to continue to have this conversation over the next hour and beyond that as well.
Thank you, Jessica. Thank you to both our candidates for giving us a sense of who you are, where you come from, and the passion and the dedication that you bring to this issue. I think we're all deeply moved and honored that you would spend your afternoon with us and that you have continued to fight this fight for a very long time. So on a personal level, thank you both. And I think I speak for all of us when I say thank you. As I say, we're going to head into about half an hour of moderated questions here. Again, this is intended to be conversational. We are going to time you both to ensure that we can kind of pack as much into this as we can, but we are intending this not to be so much a debate as a conversation where we, the audience, your potential voters, are interested to hear from you both about where your parties are headed in terms of climate action and where you think some of the opportunities or pitfalls may be. So based on those intros now, I'm just going to alternate between Tesicca and Harrison going forward here. So I'm going to start with Tesicca on this first question here, which reads as follows, that as we all know, both of you are longstanding climate change leaders. You have both very storied resumes. You're often associated with grassroots activism. We want to know what made you decide to enter party politics. And we'll go to Tesicca first for 2 minutes.
Absolutely. And I think as an advocate and someone who's been a leader in the nonprofit community, I just realized that I was constantly asking someone else to make the right decision, constantly asking for funding, asking for the right policies, asking for young people and Black, Indigenous people of color, folks who are true-spirited LGBTQIA to have a seat at the table. And I just got tired of asking, because I think at the end of the day, what I realized is that we need different decision makers at the table. It's this, I think, the same type of thinking that brought us into these issues, whether it's climate change, whether it's the opioid crisis, or as advocates are calling it, the poison drug supply crisis, whether it's, whether it's the housing affordability crisis. I think all those issues really stem from a certain type of thinking that, as I think Harrison alluded to, is colonial, is very, and is very extractivist, right? And so I think we need different people at the table, and that's why I felt like I felt like even though I have been engaging and I've been an advocate for a very long time and part of organizing, at the end of the day, we need different people that are the gatekeepers and that represent us in Victoria. And as you probably know or have heard, BC is actually a very young province. Over 40% of us are under the age of 35. And the youngest MLA in the last session was Bowen Ma, and she was 35, right? So arguably from that perspective, from an age perspective, we aren't represented at all. And how are we going to navigate such rapid changes, whether it be around the climate crisis, whether it be around the changes that are coming because of the internet and technology, but also COVID-19. We need to have intergenerational leadership, but also from I think from an equity perspective as well. If elected, I would be the first Vietnamese Canadian elected into the BC legislature. And our community has been in BC, has been in Vancouver, has been in Canada for a very long time. And yet we don't have that representation. So that's another reason that was really motivating for me to put my name forward.
Thank you very much, Tesicca. Harrison, when you're ready, we have 2 minutes for you.
Yeah, I mean, quite similarly to Tesicca, it was because I saw the people in power and saw them not acting. So yeah, as I said, I was the lead organizer of the climate strike. It was the biggest protest in Vancouver history. And the way that our government responded to that was by continuing to do exactly what they were doing before, which was nowhere near good enough. I've met twice now with BC's Environment Minister to try to push him on climate. I've met with BC's Attorney General as the NDP government was supporting the invasion of Wet'suwet'en territory. I've occupied their offices. I've tried everything I could think of to try to get our elected leaders to change the direction they were taking things in, and just haven't seen any response from them. So over the past pretty much year and a half, I've completely lost confidence in all of our elected leaders to really stand up and fight for the change that's needed. And I just couldn't wait on the sidelines any longer. Wait for leaders to change. I couldn't keep begging them to change, trying to pressure them to change. I just sort of had a realization, if I want to see some real change, some real climate action happening in our government, I need to step up and run myself. I mean, obviously I have quite a bit of privilege as a white man that I'm able to do that, able to run a campaign, not face a lot of the barriers that many other people in the climate movement are facing. But I've also seen my campaign as sort of an opportunity to demonstrate that a young activist can run a successful campaign, and really try to motivate a lot of my fellow youth activists to run, including many people who are working on my campaign. I mean, I'm pretty much the oldest person on my campaign team, so that's pretty illustrative of what I'm trying to create with this campaign.
Thank you very much, both of you. So we're going to ask you one more sort of opening question here. So we'll alternate here. So Harrison and then Tesicca. We're going to assume both of you don't agree with everything that your party does or wants to do. And so we'd like you to think about and tell us a little bit about how you think change making within the parties you're a part of happens, and what you would like to see from your party in the future, not just in this election, but moving forward. So Harrison, we'll start with you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's very true. I definitely don't agree with a lot of the decisions that the party has made in the past. And I mean, the first thing I did to change that is I was really supportive of Sonia Furstenau's campaign to become the new leader. So I joined the BC Green Party pretty much directly after Andrew Weaver stepped down, because I was not a fan of him and as a leader at all. But I really saw an opportunity. Hey, I can jump in. I can support this really amazing candidate for leadership. I can help build a new movement to change in the party. And then I've been just working really closely with certain other candidates in Metro Vancouver and across BC who I think really share my values around some of the things where maybe the Green Party has not done as well as I would have liked on in the past, whether it's supporting workers and unions, supporting renters, some of these really crucial issues where I think that the Green Party does need to do better. I've really been working with other candidates who have similar views to me and trying to build up a movement within the party, which is really happening now. Like, there is a real movement fighting for some change within the Green Party, pushing the Green Party to take more principled stances on some of these issues. Sonia Furstenau has really, really been shown great openness to that, great openness towards, working for change within the party, taking the Green Party in a different direction. So that's been really, really exciting. Just seeing, some of these other candidates. I mean, I'll highlight a few, like Nazanin, who's running in Vancouver Kensington. She's just so incredible. Devyani Singh, who's running in Vancouver Point Grey, so where UBC is. She's also just incredible candidate. And seeing these other candidates just makes me so excited for what the future of the Green Party is going to look like. Bringing in more people of color, more LGBTQ plus people, more people with more leftist politics. It's very exciting.
Thank you very much, Harrison. And Tesicca, now to you.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks so much. And I mean, I think this is exactly why I'm running, is that I think politics is all about the people that show up. And I know that we need more ambitious climate action. We need more, I think, especially, I think, centering a justice lens, because I think for so long, the environmental movement and where we've fallen down is not acknowledging and lifting up the voice of Indigenous communities and Black communities and people of color who have been telling us many of these things for a very, very long time. And instead, we've co-opted some of these ideas. We have new terms for them. But we claim them as our own while oppressing these same people for telling us the same messages. And actually, I think as Harrison has said, like, some of them have faced and continue to face real, whether it's violence, whether it's, long-term repercussions of speaking out, right? And so for me, I think similarly, of course, like I do come from quite an intersectional background in terms of being someone who is a young woman who's racialized and who's also queer, but I also have a lot of privilege, and I acknowledge that, the fact that I can put my name forward, the fact that I can run, and I know that I need to use that to work with the party, with other candidates who also share these same values, right? And I think when you look at who has been putting their name forward, it is to see, like, I think for myself, Nikki Sharma, who's running in Vancouver, Hastings, who used to work with STAND. If you look down at Richmond Stevenson, Aman Singh, who's a human rights lawyer who has been working with Indigenous communities, protecting them from logging, old growth logging in particular. So I think if there's enough of a critical voice of us, like within the party, we can shift the party mechanism. And I think we can push for more ambitious action, whether it's climate change, whether it's other issues as well.
Okay, thank you very much, Tesicca. So that gives you a sense of where these two candidates are coming from, and now we're going to turn to some of the more substantive policy issues that are at play here. So we're going to ask you both one question about climate change accountability, and so we'll ping back to Harrison here. So the question reads: all parties talk about sticking to our emissions reductions over time and reaching towards net neutrality or 80% reduction by 2050 as our carbon goals. But the reality is that emissions have climbed. They've climbed 2.1% between 2016 and 2018. And there are a number of other challenges that we face in our climate action. So we want you both to answer, what do you think is the best way to keep ongoing accountability for climate action and track our progress over time? Harrison, we'll start with you.
Tesicca, go first here. I think I went first last.
Oh, sorry. Thank you.
I'm happy to go
sorry,
first.
Tesicca.
Yeah, I'm happy to go first. Yeah, well, I think this is part of why I was really happy about the accountability legislation that was actually introduced last fall, that requires the government to report out on actions, right? So regardless of whichever party comes into power, especially, I think, looking at the previous 16 years and commitments that were made, but not necessarily followed through with, I think it's a critical piece, right? And I think even as we've been working on Clean BC, phase 1 of Clean BC was announced, and I think it was very clear that everything in the plan was modeled out. So we used a third party kind of organization to model out how each of the actions within the plan would, like how much emissions reduction targets they would account for, but also the timeline for them, because some of them we need to start acting now, and the reductions won't actually come for quite a while. But I think it was also very clear that that plan only brings us 75% of the way to 2020 to our 2030 targets, right? And so phase 2 of Clean BC is still underway, and there still needs to be more work to be done. And I think that's been very open, and that's been very public and clear. And I think that's also, in terms of my work as part of the Climate Solutions and Clean Growth Advisory Council, really trying to, I struck a committee there called the Engagement Committee, to really try to engage, whether it's Indigenous communities, to engage young people, and to engage British Columbians across the province, because we know that, of course, the provincial governments needs to lead on this, but we also need to engage citizens so that people are aware of the climate risks that are coming, are aware of, what climate actions can be taken, that we as everyday citizens have, and also to feel the agency and the empowerment to take on some of this work, but also to flag back to us as a provincial government, like, what are some of the red tapes? Like, what are some of the things that are not working, that are barriers from local communities in order to advance climate action? And I know that there's so much more work to be done, but I know that there's been significant steps that have been taken over the past 3 years.
Okay, thank you, Tesicca, and sorry for the mix-up on the phasing there. Harrison, now to you.
Yeah, I think this is a really important issue. We've seen governments for a very long time setting targets for 2030, 2040, 2050, and then not creating out plans to meet them. But also, we aren't really going to have a chance to hold people accountable to meeting their 2050 target until it's too late. So I think what's really important is that we're setting climate targets for every single government's term in office that they have to meet, so that the voters can hold them accountable if they don't meet it. Because we saw, like, with the BC Liberals, they set targets for 2020. Well, they're not going to be able to be held accountable for them because they weren't in government. They aren't in government right now, and we're not in government these past few years. Maybe the NDP will still be in government in 2030, but if so, they may have a different leader, they may have a different environment minister, they may have different MLAs who will be able to kind of avoid responsibility for not meeting their 2030 target. And I think we're going to continue to see that unless we really have targets in place for every single government's term in office. So I think it's really important that we're looking at what needs to be done just in the next 4 years, looking at that, having that be what we're really holding the government accountable for, and then making sure that every 4 years these targets are getting updated, because the science is changing really rapidly, the state of where we're at is changing really rapidly, and for very long, we've had governments who are making climate targets for 20, 30 years down on the road, and then are not willing to update them as the science is evolving. So yeah, I think it's pretty straightforward, but we just need to have the mechanisms in place so that every single elected government can be held accountable if they fail to meet the climate targets that they need to.
Okay, thank you both. Oh, and yeah, I guess I'll say to both the candidates, if you feel free to add additional commentary to the chat there if you like. Thank you, Tesicca, for taking the lead on that. So the next one is, we're jumping now to green jobs and the just transition. So very related to one of our hosts here today. What we know of most of the experiences of successful just transition programs, and there are relatively few, but from those around the world that do exist, including some of the work that was done in Alberta prior to the change in government, there's a requirement for a very complex process to achieve their outcomes. In British Columbia, if we think about whether it's logging or coal mining or natural gas, we need a complex arrangement of business, of labor unions, of First Nations, of local governments, of community groups, all at the table to work out some of these solutions together. How do you think your parties are best positioned to navigate all of these divergent interests? And this time we'll start with Harrison.
Yeah, so this is definitely a very important question, and there are just so many voices that really need to be at the table when we're having these discussions. I think that the Green Party is best prepared to navigate this mainly because of who our leader is. Sonia Personnel has really shown that she is out there in the community. She is talking to the stakeholders and is willing to be held accountable by them, which I think is really crucial. For too long, we've had leaders who pretend to be working with community groups, working with Indigenous communities, working with workers, but aren't willing to be held accountable by those leaders. And so I think that is the most important thing, is that we have a party that is going to go into these negotiations, the talks that will need to happen around the Just Transition Plan, really being ready to be held accountable by the communities that need to be considered. So we need to make sure that we have leaders in place who really understand what these communities are facing. So obviously, yeah, Indigenous people, having them involved is going to be really crucial. The Green Party seems to be the only party right now who's really stepped up and supports implementing UNDRIP into law, like actually giving Indigenous people free, prior, and informed consent over their territory. So that's obviously a good start. We have that. But I acknowledge that we need to do a lot better when it comes to working with workers, labor unions, rural communities. But the Green Party recognizes this. We recognize that those are places that we have been weak in the past, and there is a lot of work going on within the party to change that, ensure that we have good working relationships with all these stakeholders, and that if they have concerns about policy decisions that we're making, that their voices are welcome within the party, they're listened to, and that the party is not going to ignore their voices, tokenize their voices, pretend to be working with them.
Thank you, Harrison. Tesicca?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would argue, so I guess my involvement, and I similarly, I think like many folks our generation, I had a lot of distrust, and in many ways I still, am skeptical of the role and I think the level of ambition that government has. But 2 years ago, I was invited to be part of the Climate Solutions and Clean Growth Advisory Council. And after many, many years of being an activist, it was probably the first time that I sat around the table with folks, whether it was from labor, from actually industry, from municipal leaders. We had mayors on that task force. We had folks from Indigenous communities, whether they be councillors or chiefs, as well as folks, obviously, I think from the environmental community, the nonprofit sector, with an economics lens as well. And I think those are exactly the type of conversations that we need to be having, right? I think there were many, many challenging conversations there, because I think we're wrestling with the reality of implementing a just transition, right? That's why there's the folks who are representing workers, and the folks who are representing employers, and the folks who are representing Indigenous communities there. And I think we need to be having more of these conversations. But, as imperfect as I think any government's work has been on climate, when Clean BC was announced, that I remember that room just being packed of all the stakeholders who had been engaged over the past 2 years in terms of our work, who had been consulted about, how they could be part of the solution, where they face challenges, and where there might be areas where government could actually step in and support their transition work. And I also remember it was an announcement that John Horgan did with Andrew Weaver, and they also did a nod to Gordon Campbell and the BC Liberals, because that was the government that was in power when they implemented the carbon tax. Of course, I know we know what Christy Clark ended up doing with that. But I think what is really important about that is that we need to build pan-partisan support for environment and for the climate crisis, right? And that was some of the work that I was doing beforehand with GreenPAC, where we need to depoliticize the environmental issue. It's not viewed as a left versus right issue. Yeah, and I'll end my comments there, but thank you so much, George.
Thank you. So Tesicca, this next question goes to you, which is regarding resilience and adaptation. So the BC Auditor General found in 2018 that climate change could cost between $21 billion and $43 billion a year in impacts and infrastructure costs, and in the Lower Mainland, that cost could be well over $9 billion just in flood and sea level rise preparations. There's clearly a massive amount of money and infrastructure we need to be developing and rolling out in the very near future. The province will need to bring billions of dollars of new spending forward every year just in the coming decades, just to protect all the existing communities that we have, not to mention some of the transformations that we'll have to undergo as a result of climate change and other transitions. The question to you is, how do you think that the province should approach developing the kind of financial strategy that we need to actually deal with climate change and its impacts?
Thank you for the question. I really appreciate it. And also, I think this is exactly why I'm running, is that I know that whether it's for adaptation or whether it's for the COVID recovery plan, major decisions around spending are going to be happening over the next session. And folks like me need to be at the table so that we can talk about, the folks who have been most marginalized, who have been economically excluded, whether that be because of colonization, whether that be because of systemic racism, and who will be disproportionately impacted by this, right? For example, I can give you a very concrete example. For example, for folks who are, homeless, right? During COVID, we were told to shelter in place, right? If you don't have a roof over your head, how are you able to do that? And then when the wildfires came, folks were told to stay inside. And again, if you don't have a roof over your head, how are you expected to do that, right? And so we need to be looking at solutions that actually target and prioritize marginalized communities, multiple issues at the same time. And that's the type of intersectional thinking that I'm hoping that I can bring, and that I'm confident when I look at the slate of candidates, we have the most diverse candidates, the most diverse team that this province has ever seen. We have more women than men that are running. We have about a third that are Black, Indigenous people of color, 5 of which are Indigenous, 6 of us are under the age of 30, and I could go on and on. But it's a team that I'm really proud of to be running with. And I know that, of course, we still have lots of progress to do, but I would say that if you look at any other party in the province, nobody has done as much work to intentionally be recruiting and to be inclusive of diverse candidates. And I think the diverse sets of experience, lived experience, but also knowledge that we bring.
You still got 28 seconds if you want to add any more to that.
I can. I think maybe just to speak quickly to the Climate Advisory Council, it's much shorter the name now, but I was in charge of chairing the engagement committee. But we also struck an adaptation committee, because I think the most important part of this piece and this plan is that people know that what the climate risks are, and that they're engaged in terms of how to solve them. And so I think that engagement piece around adaptation is really, really key, so that local community members can be bringing the solutions forward. Thanks, George.
Thanks, Tesicca. And Harrison, to you now.
Yeah, this is obviously a very important point. And I think that we need to be looking at the spending both around climate change adaptation and working to reduce our emissions as less of dumping money away and more of actually an important investment in our communities, looking at the jobs that climate adaptation, the work that needs to be done there, is going to create. This is an amazing opportunity to be putting people to work, especially people who have been suffering during the pandemic. A lot of young people, such as myself, have been suffering to make ends meet during the pandemic. and the fact that we're going to need a bunch more engineers and construction workers who are to do these jobs in this for the adaptation that we need. I think that we need to be looking at that as a really, really important opportunity. And yeah, I think that there's going to be a lot of conversations around adapting to the climate crisis. I think especially if you look at more of the northern, rural, and Indigenous communities, we need to really make sure that those communities aren't getting left behind, that they're getting the support they need, like all across this province, so that support is not prioritized just for the Lower Mainland. And yeah, as Tesicca said, it's really important that we have those voices at the table. Because those communities are all going to have very unique situations. It's going to be very unique, the help that they're going to need. And we need to make sure that they're getting that, and that the government is not holding back spending. Like, that is the last thing that we need right now with this crisis and what we're going to face. We need a government that is really going to be willing to spend the money that is needed to protect our communities long term. And that is going to be a lot of money, but we need a government that's really going to be willing to do that, going to be willing to make sure that the people who are paying for that are not the communities who are suffering the most right now, to make sure that it's the people who have not been paying their fair share for a very long time. Look at progressive taxation to pay for it.
Thank you, Harrison. Okay, this is our final formal question, and this is going to go to both of you to give, I think the people in the audience here some sense of hope or opportunity as to how we all move together, both after this election in our sort of individual lives as humans, but also politically. How do we build the kind of change that we all think is necessary to directly confront the climate crisis? So Harrison, we're going to go to you first, then Tesicca will conclude with you. The question is, what would you say to anyone in this room thinking of entering party politics? What advice would you give them based on the experience you've had to date and what you think is coming down the pike? 2 minutes.
Yeah, so this is a really great question. I mean, it's been a really pretty crazy learning experience jumping into this campaigning. Like, we've only really been running a campaign for less than a month now, which has been really crazy. And like, my entire campaign team has been young people who haven't had any experience running political campaigns before. I mean, I had experience working on one political campaign as a canvasser, and that's pretty much the extent of the experience of our campaign team. So we've really learned a lot. But I think that the most important thing we've learned is that it's not all that hard. I mean, there's a lot of complexities, but getting in the media, talking to people, these are really easy things. Like, and the message that I'm bringing forward, like when I'm talking to people in the community, it is resonating so much with everyone. Like, every debate I've had, I come out of it, I'm getting a bunch of emails from Liberal and NDP supporters who are like, I don't know why I was not thinking of voting for you beforehand. Like, you impressed me so much. Both the Liberals and NDP really were not impressive or engaging at all. I am 100% voting for you now. Obviously, having a month-long campaign, it's a struggle to reach the amount of people that I need to win in this riding. But yeah, my advice is, like, if you're a young person, if you really care about the issues and you're willing to go out, put yourself forward and speak passionately about what you care about, why you're running, that is going to resonate with people. People are going to be supportive of that. And yeah, on top of that, I've been mentioning this to a few people. If whatever happens, I don't win, I'm fully ready to, I'm planning to pretty much take a semester off during the next municipal election to run any campaigns for any young people who want it. And if you want to run, like, hit me up after this election, if I don't win, obviously, and I will be out there supporting you however I can.
Thank you, Harrison. Tesicca, to you.
I really love that message, Harrison, and I think that's very similarly, it took me a long time. Like, I knew that I wanted to run, but I wasn't sure at what level. And then I realized, I was like, all the issues that I care about, whether it's housing affordability, whether it's climate change, whether it's childcare, whether it's equity, like gender, racism, anti-racism, anti-oppression, like all these issues do sit at the provincial level, and we can impact. We have levers at the provincial level for them. And I would just so absolutely encourage people to engage, whether you want to run yourself as a candidate, whether you want to, there's tons of roles within political campaigns as well behind behind the scenes if that's not your jam. But also I think, as Harrison and I have done for a very long time, we've been very political without being partisan. And this is I would, at least for myself, and I see Harrison nodding as well, this is my first step in jumping into a role that's more political, because I think ultimately, if there are three major political parties in the province, I would argue that there isn't a party that will be 100% a fit, right? So you have to figure out which party is the closest aligned to your values, that there are people that you're excited that you can work with, and that you're interested in continuing the work in the direction that they're headed. And of course, there's going to be, any political party is a large tent. But similarly, when I decided to run, one of the driving motivations, I was watching AOC's Knock Down the House. It's an amazing documentary about her and many, many other organizers in the States who are running. And she said something in there that just gave me this fearlessness to just go for it, which she said, hundreds of us need to run for one or two of us to get in. And all of a sudden I was like, you know what, it's not about me. Win or lose, it's not about me. And I know within my campaign, similarly, we're a core team of about 50 volunteers, and then we have about 180 folks, in the extended team. And I know at least a half a dozen folks within my team want to run. And we're young, we're racialized, we're queer, we're women of color, we're people of color, and trans, and it's really empowering, because I think we're all supporting each other. And right at the beginning of this campaign, we also made a commitment to run this campaign differently. Like, I think many of us had been part of other campaigns before where there's such burnout culture, right? They're like, we drive people to the ground. And I think, what's different about this is that we're centering self and community care and joy and love first. And of course, like, we're getting stuff done as well. But I think there's a different way of doing politics. And I would encourage people to, oh yeah. Okay. Sorry. I missed that.
No, I appreciate both of you are sharing something that you're deeply passionate about. I want to thank you both as we conclude that section of the conversation here for being champions of young people and I think you've both been really clear across the political spectrum. You're inviting people to get involved, to stick that toe into the messy waters of partisan politics and to try something different, because clearly the planet is on the line and our communities are on the line. So thank you both for that, I think, really stirring call to action. I think we all really appreciate that. What we're going to do now is we have about 15 minutes left. I'm seeing some questions coming through in the chat here. I think if it's okay with both of you, I would suggest I can wait, just give another second here to see if anyone else wants to throw any in. But what we can do is, my suggestion would be we just do 1 minute apiece on these questions. Some of them are big. I think we've got a big one here on LNG. But again, just if anyone wants to throw any others in there, we can do that. And then we'll just see how many come in, and we can kind of gauge the time based on that. Is that okay with both of you to do 1 minute a question there?
That's good with me.
Okay. I think I'm seeing you nod, Harrison. Is that okay? Okay, great. Okay, so let's start with, well, actually, I think I'm going to start with Adriana's question here because I think it touches on the sort of personal narratives piece that both of you were talking about. So Adriana's asking, I'd be really curious to know more about about how the candidates intend to work on anti-racism issues and collaborating with grassroots organizations doing this work. So to be fair here, Harrison, you started us here. So Tesicca, why don't we go to you on this one and we'll just keep alternating from there. Do we have our timer up and ready? Can we do 1 minute? Perfect. Tesicca, we'll go to you.
Wonderful. And thank you so much for the question, Adriana. I really appreciate it. This has been, I think not only is this my lived experience, but I think that there are many lived experiences that I cannot represent. And I've been committed and working in community with folks who have been leading on this work for a long time. And so if you look on our social media campaign, you'll see that I've been endorsed by folks who have, been co-founders of Black Lives Matter, Slay Blaine. I've been endorsed by Vanessa Richards, who, has been working on Hogan's Alley Society. Like I've worked with I moved up to Haida Gwaii to live up there and to learn from the Haida folks about what co-governance could look like and what reconciliation could look like in partnership, but also I think all the fights that it took to get to a place where Gwaii down there is also co-managed between the Council of Haida Nations as well as the federal and the provincial government. And so I would hope that you see that I've done this work and I've built, I think, this whole campaign, but I think my life's work has really been around relationships, like trusting that the people that are telling us know best. And I'm committed to continue to work as an organizer and to listen and to work with advocates on the inside.
Perfect timing. Thank you. Harrison, to you.
Yeah, this is obviously a really important and relevant issue right now. And yeah, obviously I'm a white guy running in politics, so I definitely don't have the lived experience that a lot of people have around this issue. And pretty much all I can say is that what I'm going to do if I'm elected is I'm going to listen to people. I'm going to put other people's voices first on this. It's not my voice that needs to be heard on these issues. If I get elected, I'm going to be there as a kind of a way into government for Black communities, for Indigenous communities, for people of color, the voices that we really need to be hearing around these issues. And yeah, I've been doing this work. I've been doing everything I can as an ally, supporting especially Indigenous organizers, land defenders in Metro Vancouver. I've been on the front lines with them, and those are the voices that I'm going to put first if I'm elected.
Thank you, Harrison. Next question here, I'm going to go to Kevin, who asks a question about lobbying. How much will you as MLAs be able to push for transparency regarding lobbying and subsidy money from fossil fuels? What legal issues prevent individual MLAs from spilling the beans? A bit of a technical question there. So we did Tesicca first, we'll do Harrison now.
Yeah, I'll admit that I'm not all that familiar with the technicalities around the lobbying rules in the BC legislature. I mean, one thing that is really important that the Greens and the NDP work together to make happen in this latest government was banning both union and corporate money from BC politics. So unions, corporations cannot donate to political parties, political candidates. The max donation for everyone is like $1,200. That's the max that any individual can donate. So that's really taken a lot of the corporate interests out of politics, which has been a really great step. But yeah, if I'm elected, I will definitely push for a lot more transparency around what MLAs are meeting with who, what voices are being prioritized in terms of who the government is meeting with, who they're listening to, because that's really, really important.
Thank you, Harrison. Tesicca.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, I think as Harrison also already mentioned the point that I wanted to share around a legislation that we as the BC NDP with the Greens introduced. And I think that, at least for me, and I think for many people, have been revolutionary. Like, I'm running against a corporate lawyer, and there's no way that I could have run without a campaign cap, and also without caps on corporate and also union donations. And it also does impact the BC NDP, but I think that we realize that it's bigger than about ourselves, and I think it's really about equity. So I'm really proud of that decision and that legislation that was put into place. I would also say that, so for anyone who is donating over $250, that information is already all public, and so you all have access to that, and that's reported out. And then I would also say that there's also a lobbying act, and so anyone who's spending over a certain threshold of time lobbying also has to register with the province as well. And so you can see not only which individuals, but what organizations they represent and who they meet with. So I think in theory, there is a lot of transparency, and then the reality is that who has the time to really look at this and to turn that work transparent. So I think, yeah, that's where I'll end off.
Okay, thank you, Tesicca. We have two questions left here that I can see. Okay, we got a few coming in. I'm going to try and, Okay, I'll try and combine these. But we had a technical question that was kind of one of the first ones. So this one might be tough, but I'll ask you both to give some high-level thoughts on this. LNG is often described as a transition fuel and is exempt from many of BC's climate environmental policies, e.g. downstream emissions are excluded from carbon accounting because of the sector's financial contribution to the provincial economy. Can you clarify your party's position on LNG and identify any of the key commitments you think that are relevant in the context of this, particularly your personal feelings on LNG? So I'm sorry, I just lost, that was Harrison started, so Tesicca, to you, please.
On this. Yeah, and I think this is one of the many issues that when I was trying to decide which party to run with, and also whether I should run in this election, it was a really challenging one, and I flagged with them that this is an area where I don't align with the political. I think, as you can probably imagine, my work, and also I think just in terms of being able to to meet our climate goals. I know that the party has not just like increased their climate ambition and has talked about net zero carbon emissions by 2050, but they've also made it really clear that, you know, any LNG development has to fit within the climate plan, and it is my belief that it won't. But I think that there's a diversity of views in the party, and that's why I think that many of us who have strong climate backgrounds, environmental backgrounds, need to be running, need to be contributing to the voices that are there at the table. So I want to be absolutely clear about my position on it.
Thank you, Tesicca. Harrison.
Yeah, I mean, this is obviously a really critical issue. I mean, around the idea of it being a transition fuel, I mean, George Heyman personally admitted to me that the BC NDP haven't done any studies to show that LNG would displace the use of coal in Asian economies, which is their main claim for why this investment fits within climate targets and what we need to be doing. So yeah, personally, like we need to immediately end all subsidies to the LNG industry. We need to be working to phase it out in the next decade at the absolute latest. And that's going to take a lot of investments, especially in retrofitting buildings, because right now LNG is a big part of heating both water and space within buildings. So we're going to need a lot of investments in retrofits there. We absolutely should not be building any new LNG infrastructure that will not fit within any climate plan. The NDP have not shown any way that it does fit into their climate plan.
Okay. We're going to close out here. I see we have two more. I'm going to end with this last question here because I think this is a really powerful one from, I believe it's Inderjeet here. How do young candidates who are motivated to run for office overcome the partisan politics and differentiate themselves and their individual opinions on certain policy initiatives? So, you know, this speaks to both of you talking about the disagreements you have with your parties, but I think this would be a great place to close on for both of you is how do you differentiate? How do you make the difference as a young candidate in politics? And I'm sorry, I'm losing track here. I've got too many windows open.
I think Harrison's going to go first.
Okay, Harrison. Yeah. And then we'll close with you, Tesicca. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, this was part of the reason why I chose to run with the Green Party is they don't whip votes. There is room for different voices within the party. There is room for different opinions from the party. And I personally was very clear with the party from the outset about who I am, what I stand for, and pretty much left it up to them like, hey, I want to run with you. If what I stand for isn't welcome in the party, you tell me and I won't run. But I was really, really clear about who I was, what I was standing for, what I was going to fight for, what issues I differed from the party on. And the party wanted that. They wanted my voice to be included. They wanted my voice as a young person, as an activist, as a renter, as someone who supports a lot of issues like around unions and workers that the party in the past has had different positions on. And yeah, that was really the only way I was going to be comfortable and going to decide to run is if I really, really felt that the party I was running with was comfortable with who I am, what I would stand for, and the Greens absolutely were.
Thank you very much, Harrison. And Tesicca, the last word to you.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. And I think it's such an important one because I think as an advocate and someone who has been part of grassroots organizing for so long, like I think I have a certain level of freedom, or I had a certain level of freedom that really allows me to speak exactly to, you know, the issues that I want to. And I think when you work within a party, at least, you know, my experience of it has been that, you know, if I'm not able to convince my party and the folks who are elected who already share certain broad sets of values, like how are we able to move and to convince the entire province that this is a good idea, right? And so I understand that it is and has been and will continue to be something that's challenging for me because I've been a very outspoken advocate. And I think anyone who looks, you know, scratches the nail into like my past knows where I stand on these positions. But I also understand the need for a certain sense of like, we have to move together and we actually have to convince the broader, like, you know, most of British Columbians that this is the right idea and this is where we need to go.
Thank you very much. Thank you to both of you for giving us your afternoon, for, I think, offering us a lot of really inspiring ideas and senses of where you're coming as individuals, but also the kind of systemic societal transformations that we all need to pursue. I think I want to express, again, gratitude on behalf of everyone here, on behalf of myself and all the organizers for this, for you both running, for you giving your time, for your service. This is critical. And I think, as you both noted, win or lose, your voices in this issue, in this space, are advancing the issues that we all care about. They're helping transform how we think about climate action, how we think about racial justice, how we think about reconciliation. Just being at the table as two young people and amongst all of the communities that you both represent is how we're going to start to move things in the direction that we need to be going. So thank you both so much for that. My call to action to all of you is that you all have a job to do if you haven't done it already, which is that if you are able to, in the province of British Columbia, we ask you all to go and vote. If you haven't already had a chance to order your mail-in ballot, if you haven't had a chance to, or to go to an advanced polling station, please do so. You'll see a note here in the chat. Apathy is Boring, in partnership with a number of youth organizations, including the Vancouver Global Shapers and the Vancouver Global Shapers and City Hive, is looking to encourage you to vote, to prime you to get out there and make that choice on October 24th. We ask you to sign that pledge, and you'll notice in the chat as well that there are two different volunteering opportunities with Tesicca and Harrison's campaigns. They've got sign-up sheets there. Please do so. And I want to thank you all of the attendees, for being here with us, for sharing your afternoon with us, and for, I know, all the incredible work that you're doing to advance climate action. Thank you all very much for your time. Have a wonderful day, and get some rest after October 24th. I think we're all going to need it. Thank you all so much.
Thanks so much for having us, and best of luck, Harrison.
Yeah, best of luck to you too. Thank you everyone for joining.